This is Euronews Now. Here are your top stories. A glimmer of hope that a global food crisis can be averted as Ukraine and Russia sign a vital UN-backed deal to restart grain exports. The EU takes the UK to task over Brexit deal breaches, launching legal proceedings against London. In the US, a panel hears that Trump ignored pleas to stop the riot as a mob attacked the Capitol on January 6th.
And YouTube pledges to remove false and unsafe content about abortions 1 month after the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
I'm Helena Humphrey. Glad you could join me. Tonight, a glimmer of hope that a global food crisis could be averted. That's after Russia and Ukraine both signed a UN-backed deal to resume grain exports from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Well, top officials from Kyiv and Moscow travel to Istanbul to give the green light on an agreement that will hopefully see vessels restart export operations. It is worth noting that delegates from both countries signed parallel deals brokered by Turkey and the United Nations. UN Chief Antonio Guterres pledged that his organisation would work to ensure exports run smoothly, but Kyiv has warned that any provocation by Russia over the deal will be met with a military response. We spoke to Peter Dickinson from the Atlantic Council, who said that details into how the deal will play out in practice pose serious security challenges.
It's an unusual deal. It certainly reflects the highly unusual circumstances of the current war between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine was very clear that they would not sign a bilateral agreement, a direct deal with Russia. So they have signed a deal with the UN. Russia has signed a parallel deal, as your introduction mentioned. Now, essentially, the UN and Turkey working together will be responsible for overseeing the renewal of shipments of agricultural produce, largely grain, from Ukraine's key Black Sea ports, that's Odessa and some other nearby ports, which have been under blockade since the Russian invasion began on February the 24th. Russia has said that they will allow this now. They will permit this to continue. They will permit the renewal of these grain shipments. Of course, there are the practicalities of the deal are fraught with problems, potential problems. Implementation will be very challenging. So at this stage, I think it's too early to say that the danger of a food crisis is over, that the famine fears are past. But it certainly looks like a step in the right direction.
As you say, Peter, still very much a glimmer of hope at this stage. But you point to the fact that it's not a bilateral deal in the traditional sense. So, one would think that this points to the fact that for the Ukrainians, there wasn't necessarily full trust here. So have they been given any assurances from the Russians that they won't be attacked from an opened up position?
Well, I think the Ukrainian position is clear that they don't regard that Russian words or statements or signed documents or anything coming from Moscow to be of any worth whatsoever. Of course, Russia has many, many international commitments and bilateral commitments to Ukraine. It has since invaded Ukraine and is now engaged in what Ukrainians believe to be a war of destruction, a war of annihilation. They are wiping out Ukrainian towns and cities systematically. So the notion that there could be some form of a contractual agreement or deal with Russia is actually considered to be absurd in Ukraine at this point. Now, whether these shipments will be safe or not, only time will tell. But Ukraine was very clear from the outset and has been very clear in the last couple of days as the signing has come closer that this is not a deal with Russia. This is a deal with the United Nations in order to alleviate a global food crisis. And it should not in any way be seen as legitimizing Russia's claims to Ukraine or positions in and around Ukraine.
You point to the fact that this is a deal between Russia and the United Nations. So what can the UN do if Russia violates its side of the bargain?
Well, I think the war rather, since it began 5 months ago now, has really shown that the UN has very limited capability to take any action against Russia, really. I mean, Russia remains a permanent member of the Security Council and is essentially immune to sanction from the EU, from the United Nations side. I think if the deal were to break down, all that we would see would be simply it would be officially abandoned and Russia would receive the blame and the opprobrium from the international community. It would be condemned and Russia would, I think perhaps crucially from Russia's point of view, they would lose a lot of their credit amongst the developing world, which is a key area of Russian foreign policy at the moment. Russia, having essentially burnt its bridges with the Western world, is looking very much to secure a position within the developing world to strengthen its position there. Now, if it's seen to be causing widespread famine, obviously that would be hugely damaging for Russia. So Russia is very eager to deflect blame from any food crises and to point the blame elsewhere to the West and to Ukraine. If it were to unilaterally break this deal that's now being brokered, those efforts would come to nothing.
The EU Commission is launching 4 legal cases against the UK over its post-Brexit dispute concerning trade protocols in Northern Ireland. Now, on Wednesday, the UK's House of Commons passed a bill that could give Westminster unilateral powers of border control in Northern Ireland that goes against the 2019 withdrawal agreement signed during Brexit negotiations, which kept Northern Ireland within the EU's single market. Well, from Brussels, our correspondent Maeve McMahon says that Brussels is beginning to show its frustrations with Westminster over its Brexit handling.
According to these lengthy press materials provided today by the European Commission, it seems like the EU is just fed up, really, of the inaction on the part of the United Kingdom, that they're not implementing what they promised they would in the Northern Ireland Protocol, despite the nagging coming from Brussels over the last couple of months. The Commission said today that back in February 2022, they put, quote, meaningful, long-lasting solutions on the table, but since have not been able to engage in, quote, meaningful dialogue. So they've called the UK government out for 4 different breaches to that protocol today for not fulfilling their promises in the areas of carrying out checks, for example, between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and also not implementing EU VAT rules regarding e-commerce. The European Commission saying that this is threatening EU fiscal rules, and also there's a risk of smuggling between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Now, the UK has 2 months to respond to this severe letter. That task and deadline will, of course, not be easy to implement, given minds are focused in the United Kingdom on a very important leadership contest. Results, of course, we'll find out perhaps on the 6th of September. And anyone looking to be the head of the Tories and the Prime Minister of the UK right now won't want to look also like it's bending to what Brussels is demanding. But really, the Commission here trying to make a point and trying to show to the future head of the Tory party and the United Kingdom that they will still have to take all this boring paperwork from Brussels very seriously.
Well, the UK port of Dover has declared a critical incident following major delays at the English Channel ferry crossing. Passengers have been experiencing waiting times of up to 6 hours, with those tailbacks stretching for miles. Now, port authorities are blaming French border officials stationed at Dover for the delays. French authorities say an unforeseeable technical incident left their border checks short-staffed, but they had warned the port ahead of time. Germany has agreed a deal with energy giant Uniper to take a 30% stake in the company. Now, Berlin has prepared a 15 billion euro bailout package to help the gas importer in the wake of the European energy crisis. In a statement on Friday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the deal was to ensure that no one is left alone with their challenges and problems. Well, as Europe attempts to navigate the energy crisis, there are huge questions as to whether countries can secure new sources of fuel while staying true to climate targets. All of that against the backdrop of a cost of living crisis. Joining me now is Alessio Terzi. He is an economist and the author of the book Growth for Good. Alessio, great to have you with us. Thanks for being with us. When we think about climate change, I think there are some people who would argue that essentially capitalism got us to this point. Capitalism got us to a stage where the planet is rapidly heating up. So can we continue to operate within the confines of that system if we want to save the planet? What would you say to that?
Thanks for having me. What I try to argue in the book is that, capitalism has many negative sides to it, perhaps. But if there is one thing that it is good at, is that it is a good machinery to foster innovation. And this is something we're going to need a lot of in order to green our economy and to roll out new technologies. And so what I try to say is perhaps it is more useful, rather than dream of destroying the whole system, to try and think what is needed in order to reorient the system and enroll capitalism in our battle against climate change.
Well, Alessio Boy, as you say there, I mean, we are going to need that innovation very much so. But we've also got a situation where we've just seen US President Biden come back from Saudi Arabia, for example, with a request to pump more oil. European countries saying we don't want to cut off Russian gas. Germany looking at coal again. Do you think that these countries will get on board with the innovation, with the green transition in a timely fashion when they've got to deal with a cost of living crisis and looking their electorate in the face?
So perhaps against conventional wisdom, I would argue that the result of this energy crisis will actually be an acceleration in the green transition. And as you say, it might look strange right now because we are doing these things like reopening coal-fired power plants, and so climate despair would look natural. But I would argue that what is happening right now is that the polluting option, whether it is methane or whether it is gasoline, is becoming much more expensive, which makes the green option much more palatable. And so we will see a switch by consumers that accelerates. A year ago, I would have to try and persuade my friends to buy an electric car, and they would say it's much more expensive, I'll never get the money back. Right now, it is much cheaper to buy an electric vehicle, to drive an electric vehicle, than it is for the internal combustion engine option. And we're seeing governments as well invest or put much more money on the table for energy security reasons in renewables, because they want to sever the links with Russia and with let's say fossil fuels. So I would argue that if we go beyond the very short term, in the medium to long term, we will see an acceleration in the green transition.
Do you think this is a bit of a branding issue, even from governments then, for example, to sell these green alternatives? Because right now, when people are going through a cost of living crisis, you make the case there yourself very clearly in the long run about these kind of options being more affordable. But when people are trying to get to the end of the month, they're maybe just not seeing it that way. Do you think that governments need to do a better job at just selling that to electorates?
So I think there is part of a narrative problem in the sense that we frame the green transition as costs, it's more costly, it's the costlier option and so on. And there is nothing written in the stars that says that the green option must be the expensive option. So I think that there is a narrative problem there, but there is a reality, which you're hinting at, which is right now there is a cost of living crisis. And so, you know, the energy crisis is not good. Is not a good thing, aside from the fact that there are obviously atrocities related to the war, but there are people that are having trouble making it to the end of the month, and it is going to be more challenging from a macroeconomic perspective. And so governments will have to intervene, help out those in need in the economy. It will be challenging. We will have to bring inflation under control. So there are challenges, and there are choppy waters ahead. But if we manage to go beyond the next few months, which will be tough, I think that there is a greener world ahead of us.
All right, challenges, but potentially also opportunities ahead. The message there from Alessio Terzi, an economist and the author of the book, as you can see there, Growth for Good. Pleasure to have you on, Alessio. Thank you.